We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Ruby Garcia. She is a leadership and life coach, helping people find their confidence. We love to see it. Ruby, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns and when you were younger, do you remember how exactly you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yes. Okay. I'm Ruby Garcia, she, her, hers. Super excited to be here. I am first generation Mexican American. I identify as Latina. I am also differently abled, as I like to call myself. I was born with a limb difference. I don't consider myself disabled though, because identity is very personal. And what I wanted to be when I grew up was a writer.
I love that. I was a big writer when I was younger as well, and definitely thought that was one of the paths I would go to down the line. Fast forward to today, you're helping folks really come into and discover their confidence. Can you tell me about some of the common patterns you've seen in individuals or companies at large, really seeking out your consulting services in coaching and leadership since the pandemic started, I think at least 3 years ago?
Yeah. I don't know that the pandemic has had an influence in terms of the reasons why people come to me. I feel like it's pretty similar. Most of my clients come from, or either first generation or come from the Latinx community, and come with a lot of similar uh, struggles, I guess. One is imposter syndrome is always a huge one. That's probably the number one thing that I hear is, I feel like I don't belong here. I feel like a fraud. Um, a lot of times it's even getting they're even promoted, and I'm not sure if I can do this, if I'm cut out for this. So imposter syndrome is probably the biggest thing that I hear with, which really, also ties in with the confidence, right? I want to be more confident. I want to be able to speak up more. I want to make my voice heard. I want to bring my thought leadership into the room. And then the other struggles are just, I think I see a lot with first gen professionals in terms of I don't know how to navigate corporate America because there's been no one around me to kind of introduce this other world to me. I don't have the resources or even know where to go for the resources. I don't even have the language sometimes. I know I am a first gen college graduate and first gen corporate professional in my previous career. And I didn't even know what to ask for because I didn't even know what things like personal branding was. Now I'm a little older, so, we live in a different world now with, content creation and things like that. But for many first generation students, they don't even know the language or what it is to ask for. So those are some of the barriers that I hear is like, how do I navigate this? What do I do? Even basics of like, how do I create a resume? I think I just have to put my name information in my work history. But how do I do that in today's world to make myself stand out?
Absolutely. I think imposter syndrome is definitely something that is talked about a lot, especially in those corporate settings. And if you don't have the foundation of folks in your life who have been through those corporate settings or have been able to access those resources as well. So, in terms of democratizing that information, coaching, really understanding the languages you're talking about as well, can you define like what career confidence coaching is for folks who are listening? And an example of how you measure that impact when someone really is coming into their confidence in the space.
Yeah. The place that I always start with career confidence is identity, because identity is such a foundation to who we are, and we have to be able to feel comfortable with ourselves in order to bring our full selves into work. So we really start looking at identity. So my approach to coaching is very holistic. So we're always looking at who are you being and who do you need to be in order to achieve the results that you want, whether that's I want a promotion, whether that's I want more visibility, whatever it is. We're always kind of looking at who are you and who do you want to be. And then the second piece of that is really looking at once we have that establishing is you know, with who, with what it is that you want to do, how do we get you there, right? And so we look at, okay, what resources are available to you, what knowledge do you have, and really looking at, okay, here is what I do have available to me, and I can empower these tools and resources to help me get to where I want to go. And then also, what are the barriers, what are the challenges, what is it that I lack, and how do I start to build, fill in those gaps. So we really kind of look at two parts, which is really the being and the doing, and marrying those together so that we can have success. And a lot of that gets measured. I do have an assessment that I take with clients in the very beginning to kind of get a baseline. And then we, after the usually a 3 months of coaching, we'll reassess that to see where you are and progress along the way, as well as just looking at things like, are you getting job, like if they're looking for a job, are they getting job interviews? Are you, is your network growing? Are you starting to gain visibility? So we're looking at a lot of other things. Each client, we really is very customized. So we're looking at what's going to be most important, and letting the values drive you to, which is part of that inner work and the foundational work that we're doing. And then, the other thing that's maybe not as quantitative is just, how are you feeling? Are you feeling more like yourself? Are you feeling more confident? Are you feeling more comfortable in your own skin? Are you feeling happier? Those are all things that we're looking at too, because maybe it's not as easy to measure, but it is definitely just as important.
Absolutely. It's just as important when you're thinking about your identity, your goals, your ideal of how you would like to show up at work and building a pathway to get there, how you're feeling. And that's just one part of it as well. I think there's also an onus and responsibility of employers and companies to set up frameworks, places where people can succeed and bring their ex selves to work. You mentioned that some of your clients who come to you are first generation as well. What is your advice for more really organizations and also leaders, specifically managers, to intentionally set up first generation folks for success at their company?
I think there's a couple things. I think one is the power of ERGs or BRGs, employee resource groups, business resource groups. I think those can be a great tool. So making sure that employees are aware of these groups, and then making sure that that's something that's continuously spotlighting, where employees can go and feel safe to have conversations that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable in other spaces within the organization to have. So I think that those are really important and can be really powerful. I think one of the other things is inclusive language. There's a lot of jargon when you get in corporate America, and in some organizations it's more than others, and that can be very excluding for someone that has never been exposed to corporate and then to walk into all this jargon. So looking at, how do we say what we need to say effectively and simply, right? It doesn't have to be complex. How do we just use everyday terms to express what it is that we need to get accomplished? Even things like icebreakers. I've heard icebreakers where it's been like, what's your favorite vacation, for example? Well, maybe not everyone has that lived experience of going on vacation. Or I know on my first business trip, everyone was talking about cabins and skiing and things that I thought, we don't have a second home. They were really out of reach. And I remember kind of clamming up in that experience because I felt like I didn't have something to contribute. So even being mindful of those type of conversations can be really important. Another thing that I think that we can work on is, there's a lot of talk right now, especially during the employment process, about culture fit, whether this person is a good culture fit. And again, I think this can be, for first generation professionals in particular, this could be something that would easily exclude them, or exclude us as first gen professionals, because we haven't been exposed to that again. So, that it can be really deterring, to think about, uh, just to think about that culture fit, to be a little more inclusive of what that might look like. Does this person have, skills? Is this person willing to grow? Is this person coachable? So kind of expanding our thought around culture fit. And then the other thing is there's a lot of focus on high potential talent. Um, but what that looks like in an organization can maybe be a little deceiving. Again, we might be looking at excluding high potential first generation talent because we're looking for people that are maybe very visible, that are maybe speaking up a lot, but that doesn't always necessarily translate into high potential. So we may be overlooking people that would be good candidates for some of these maybe leadership development programs or stretch projects, things like that. So I think expanding our view for organizations to expand the view of what a good candidate might look like. I think we need to start opening up that conversation a little more.
Yeah, I think around the language for culture addition as well, in terms of not hiring for someone you can, go to happy hour with as well, and looking for someone to really add to your organization, at their story. I love what you said about employee resource groups as well. I think that's an incredible opportunity to create connection with folks across different departments in the organization who might share a similar experience, and not making assumptions that everybody has a second home, goes skiing, and has those same experiences. How is the role of storytelling really related to creating meaningful connections at work and really understanding someone's kind of lived experience?
Yeah, I think this is where listening becomes the most important thing, right? Really active listening, um, listening to learn. This really, being vulnerable in the stories that we share. Of course, I think that we have to be careful with, vulnerability, even not to, we have to ask ourselves, is there an intention, or how is this relevant in what we're sharing? But I think that storytelling can just, when we use storytelling appropriately, it becomes a way to relate to each other. It creates that connection. For example, I'm going to use myself again here, being born with a limb difference. Maybe not everyone can relate to that, but maybe they can relate to someone labeling them, for example, right? Or they can relate to the feeling of not belonging. So storytelling can, when used effectively, can really create that bridge, because we all have that experience, have had experiences of maybe not belonging or feeling like we're labeled or things like that. So it really can create connection. Then we start to learn from each other.
Yeah, we start to learn from one another, and also the goal of really finding that common ground, and also not thinking that we have the same experience as someone as well, and really kind of leading with that vulnerability and empathy too. I know earlier when we were talking about imposter syndrome and just building that confidence as well, that feeling of, do I feel differently when I show up in spaces and in corporate America? Do I feel more confident? And I think that qualitative piece is so important. And a lot of organizations and leaders are trying to pinpoint if their organization is kind of doing better in ensuring they are setting up a workplace of psychological safety and building that trust. What are the ways that leaders can qualitatively and quantitatively measure if their company is a place where people can thrive and feel like they belong, along those lines of active listening?
Yeah. I definitely think the first area that comes to mind is just retention, right? Retention is a one area that I think that you can look at immediately and say, are employees staying? How long are they staying? Are they engaged when they're staying? Looking at the results. I think this is also, again, where ERGs can be really effective, because you kind of have that liaison between, what's the experience of people, what's their lived experience, what are the things that they are saying about, the organization and their work, and using that as a tool to kind of be a pipeline up into leadership's ears. And then for leadership to actually act on that, a lot of times, that's maybe the disconnect is, people are speaking up, but they're not being heard. So making sure that there is action, and that they're validating some of the feedback that's coming from, the different groups.
Yeah, asking yourself the question, how am I demonstrating that I am actively listening and setting up an environment where people will continue to want to share their experience, give feedback, whether it's positive, negative, anything in between, constructive. So employee resource groups or BRGs might be present at an organization. Oftentimes there's a lot of great programming that comes out of it as well in creating that space. Maybe they're not present and there's a diversity, equity, and inclusion council, or there's leaders who are really invested in it. Whatever the case may be, do you think that it's a requirement for companies to really hold that intentional space and provide resources for those vulnerable or uncomfortable conversations? Why or why not?
I think there is an obligation to hold that. And some might disagree with me, but I think that the way that organizations are showing up is shifting. Right now, I feel like there's this kind of invisible tug of war between what employees want and how organizations are leading in this. And we can see this in things like the Great Resignation, or even with topic of quiet quitting that has been coming up a lot. And so there's kind of this invisible tug of war. And I think for the organizations that don't decide to, or who decide to stay with the status quo, I think it's going to be much more difficult for them, because employees are becoming more clear about what they want in an employer, what they want from their organization. And I think one of the big things is that they want to feel seen and heard. They want to be able to bring their whole authentic selves to work. They want to be recognized for their contributions and have that rewarded, whether, that be through promotion or salaries, things like that. So I think that if organizations want to continue to grow and innovate and have the best, high caliber talent, it's going to require them to have some of these maybe uncomfortable conversations and difficult conversations. And this is really where our leaders need to, be courageous, right? And really demonstrate the qualities of courageous leadership.
Be courageous and really think differently about how they show up, how they're modeling that behavior, how they're intentionally connecting with their team as well, and opening up space to have these conversations. I also agree that it is a responsibility for companies and leaders to really have these conversations with folks as well. Is there, I guess, on the flip side, a discussion, more kind of an open ended question that you are most excited to see happening in the DEIB space that's happening right now, and why?
I think there's a couple conversations that I'm really loving. I'm loving the authenticity conversation. I believe in, one of my top values is self-expression and freedom. And so I love that, that's a conversation that's been having more is about authenticity. I think another conversation, maybe we're not talking about it completely yet, but I think we're leaning in that direction, is also intersectionality. Right. So there are many different layers to each of us, and we hold many different roles and identities. And I think that, unpacking those different identities, learning from each other, again, finding shared experiences, that creates that connection, that builds that rapport, it builds trust. And so I think I'm really excited about that conversation.
Intersectionality, so important, a term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, and the conversation around authenticity, I definitely agree with that as well. This work is, especially being a diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging champion, helping folks really with their confidence levels, and it's a continuous journey. It's never done. I'm sure you have many of these, but what is one of your most recent proudest moments?
Oh, this was a tough one. I don't know that I can name one. I have one, almost every day. I feel like I have a new proudest moment, and it's usually not even my own win, but it's the win of my clients. Yesterday I had someone reach out to me and on LinkedIn, and they were saying how they were, they saw half of a presentation that I had presented at their organization, but had to leave because they're preparing for a town hall, and they couldn't believe they were actually preparing for a town hall. And I thought, that's such a huge win. I love hearing about other people's successes, or, a client getting a promotion. those are the things that I get the most excited and I'm the most proud of, because I really do feel like it's a win for all of us.
Definitely. It's a huge win to see that tangible change happen and that growth. Ruby, I want to pass the mic back to you to see if there's anything that I didn't specifically ask that you'd like to share with folks who are listening, or underscore any kind of key takeaways about the many things we discussed today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing I would say is when it comes to first gen, I think there's very easy to have different biases, but for first generation professionals, we've had to learn to overcome, and because of that, we're born to succeed. We will find ways. We're resourceful. We will network. We will learn. We will work hard, and I think that instead of looking at what there is maybe of lack, also just looking at the tenaciousness and the strengths that a first gen professional brings to the workplace.
Absolutely. I think that's a great call to action and something to remember as well. Ruby, thank you so much for the work that you are doing and for being a guest on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employees and employers being seen, heard, and understood. I know it's a requirement for the business to really succeed overall. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.